further ado, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the introduction. My name is Evan Coopersmith. I am currently the EVP of Data Science at AE Studio, which has offices in the United States and Brazil. And I wanted to talk a little bit today about where I think we see technology going as it relates to human agency. There's going to be some speculation. We're going to talk with our eyes forward to the future. And at all times, our crystal ball is hazy, but we're futuristic, we're altruistic, and we're optimistic. We always think things are going to get better and that we have an opportunity to play a part. So at AE, the AE stands for Agency Enterprise. Human agency is what we and what developers in general should be all about. I don't know how many of you guys have seen Anchorman, but the quote at the bottom is a reference to it. I don't know how to say this, but it's kind of a big deal. It's very important. My desk is not made out of rich mahogany, and there are not leather-bound books behind me. But human agency is crucial. And AE exists for our developers, for our clients, and for human beings in general. And this means we're always trying to develop software that helps human beings become the best, most productive, and most focused versions of themselves. So as you know, IDEO is to design thinking, AE is to human agency. And we've built a name for ourselves around human agency. And what I'm going to sort of try to argue today is that everybody who works in the world of software development is sort of on this journey together with us. So let's talk a little bit about the Human Agency Manifesto. We're going to talk a little bit about why I think this is probably the most important century in which to exist in terms of human agency as it relates to technology. We're going to talk a bit about why modern technology in some cases pushes us absolutely in the wrong direction. And I would like to impress upon everybody here that increasing agency as software developers is not only a good and kind thing to do, but it's good for business. It will make money for all of us. And it'll work for you too. It works for our clients. It works for our developers. This is why we do everything we do. This is why the company exists. This is the North Star that we orient ourselves towards. So we wrote ourselves a Human Agency Manifesto. It's somewhat long and wordy, and the reason that it's perhaps a bit longer and wordier than you might expect is it's based on the Agile Manifesto. I'm sure plenty of the folks listening here are acutely aware of and familiar with Agile, and so Agile is a little bit wordy with its manifesto, and so are we. This is what we do. We're trying to uncover better ways to do this. We have hackathons regularly to try to do this, but this is kind of what we believe for software engineering. We believe that individual flow is more important than interruption. We always want to favor complete thoughts over constant communication. And heck knows between Slack and emails and chats and whatever else, communication is awfully constant. We put a premium on single threading over multitasking. I hate the word multitasking, and the reason I hate it is because no human being is capable of doing it. We all pretend we can, but none of us actually can. We always want to have easy to remember user flows over anything flashy that is just sort of a trend. We want to conserve willpower over paradox of choice. What we really mean when we say that is if being productive and focused means forcing yourself with willpower to be focused at every moment, you'll probably ultimately succumb and fail. But if you put systems around you that increase your focus and increase your willpower, you will succeed. And ultimately, we think long-term customer value is going to be much more important than short-term economic gains. And the companies that get this right are going to be the ones that succeed. And we do this for our developers, our clients, and everybody everywhere. So I said this is going to be the most important century. That's a nice statement that I would like to put a little bit of mathematical rigor behind. So if you look at the chart on the right, what you're going to see is a bunch of lines going steeply up and to the right exponentially. And those lines refer to the population of the Earth, global GDP, how much money is in circulation, cars and paper and cement. There was a massive economic boom in the 20th century, and specifically the latter half of the 20th century. The 21st century is going to see the same pattern, but it's going to be about information and computation. In other words, all of the things that the people in this audience are working on every day. So at AE, we're already talking about fascinating work in brain-computer interfaces and Web3 and blockchain and anything world-altering we can get our hands on. So what does that mean? Well, it means that we at AE and every other company in the universe with their heads screwed on properly are going to need the most talented, the most scrappy, and the most creative people we can find. And it's part of this is because we have to realize the highest forms of intelligence and consciousness that computers can create have not yet been created. We are still learning about the consciousness in other people's brains. We're coming to care more about the collective community of people in the world. And as developers, we're all sort of trying to build not just technology and software, but the future of human thought. I don't know how many of you are fans of Jonathan Colton. This is the guy who wrote the song at the end of Portal. This was a triumph. I'm making a note here, huge success. I won't sing, nobody here deserves that. But one of his songs is entitled, It's Going to Be the Future Soon. And when you see a chart that moves as sharply up and to the right as this one, well, it is going to be the future soon, and we're all going to be part of it. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is that too much of modern technology is designed to do almost exactly the opposite of what we're describing. So I found a definition on Urban Dictionary of doom scrolling. What is doom scrolling? And I'm going to read it. It says, when you keep scrolling through all of your social media feeds looking for the most recent upsetting news about the latest catastrophe, the amount of time spent doing this is directly proportional to how much worse you're going to feel after you're done. In other words, dude, stop doom scrolling. It's only going to make you feel worse. I can't. The dopamine loop is too strong. And this is what technology does to us sometimes. That's what dark patterns are. We have to tell our clients no sometimes and steer them away from these things. So this is something that we have to consider as a risk, especially in a world where short-term incentives start to dominate and we're always chasing Series A and then Series B, and we're trying to get as much revenue out of Q4. Healthier companies don't do this. Healthy developers help companies avoid doing this. If the board thinks that maximizing shareholder value is going to mean addicting eyes to screens, then we have a problem. And human agency means pushing back and fighting against this. So I'm going to argue that increasing agency is not just, again, a good thing. It would be nice to avoid addicting people to screens, but it's also good business. So we had an internal project at AE called Electric SMS. And really what this did was it allowed individual users to manage subscriptions with just a text message. Now, sometimes people wanted to cancel subscriptions, but sometimes they just wanted to skip a month. They wanted to change the size of that subscription, some small change. And there was this initial quote, many companies believe that giving people more control over their purchases equates to decreased revenue and retention for merchants, meaning if you let people choose to spend less money, they will, and it'll cost you money in the short term. Well, that's true. However, the second quote, if we treat people well, we build technology that allows people the transparency and the ability to act on where their money's going, they're going to have a longer relationship with the brands that they're purchasing from. In other words, the long-term value of a customer to whom you give agency is much higher. Give a customer their agency, they will be a better customer for longer. Penny wise versus pound foolish. We believe this, and we've proved it out several different times. So how does AE get after this? Well, we have a business model built upon consulting, skunkworks, brain-computer interface technology, altruism, and equity. And we think that most development will ultimately use these principles going forward. So what does that mean? Well, we have a development and data science consultancy that helps us pay the bills. We have these internal skunkworks that we are trying to build a new incubation model out of with hackathons and experiments internally. We build brain-computer interfaces. We try to base our company around not venture capital, not private equity, not public shareholders, but just the ability to give some of our profits to charity and then some equity to the people involved. And so let's talk a little bit about how this might look. So let's start with the most straightforward part of this, which is AE's unique business model. We're a development and data science consultancy, and we're already doing just an absolutely enormous quantity of cool stuff on a daily basis. And we're building our brand and we're building our name. And personally, we have more cool stuff to do than we have talented developers to do it. So the limiting principle is how many talented people we can bring in to get these things done. And the thing about this is, at least for us, and I think for every developer, every client we bring in the door is an opportunity for developers to grow and for AE to learn. What do clients need? How can we help them increase their agency? And we've had experiences building MVPs for startups and energizing large enterprises and everything between, and they're all learning opportunities. But in addition to this, when we do this work for our clients and we are able to sort of generate some surplus, one of the things we do is we try to incubate agency increasing technological ideas. And we hold hackathons frequently to sort of make this possible. And we sort of ask ourselves this question, and we all should ask ourselves these questions as developers. How many great ideas never see the light of day because there's some would-be founder who doesn't want to live on an air mattress and eat ramen for the next 2 years? So this great idea never flourishes because the person doesn't want to take that personal risk. The other thing is that the number one cause of startup failure is disagreements among co-founders. So we think we have a better model here. Sometimes internally, we take people who want to work on something together. They already know each other, so they know their potential co-founders and know they work well with them. They know what the clients they're working with are going to want. And so they can build a project that AE can help support. And this incubation model will unlock just an unbelievable amount of value that will be good for developers and it'll be good for society. We don't think our developers are going to leave to join other software agencies. We think they're going to leave to become founders themselves. And we think this is ultimately the best version of software engineering going forward. And the next thing we think a lot about is brain-computer interface technology. So paralyzed human beings right now, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this technology, are slowly regaining the use of lost limbs by the electrical activity in their brain and those thought patterns used to move robotic arms. We've been using brain-computer interface technology to help stop seizures already, but when we think to the future, some of these types of technological patterns and some of this computation is going to be used to eliminate our need for things like our keyboard and our mice. And we're already working to improve the state of the art with respect to this kind of technology. It's important to think about the fact that nothing is really more important or more complex than the brain. By way of a brief digression, I haven't told you much about what I used to do before I worked at AE. I used to be a government scientist for the United States, and I would dig holes and install soil moisture sensors in the ground. And I always used to tell people the most complicated data set to play with as a data scientist was the landscape of the Earth, until a neuroscientist corrected me and said, no, the most complicated data set in the world is the brain. And so as software developers, there's nothing more fun to play with than a data set of rich complexity. So how do we manage this business model? So for one thing, we don't have venture capital and we don't have private equity and we don't have public shareholders. So we get to make choices that other companies don't. And we think there will be more companies who operate this way. Right now, if you click on our website and you scroll down to the bottom, and you all should do this, go to ae.studio, scroll down to the bottom, and you can vote for which charity AE will donate 5% of its profits to in December. Seriously, you should all go do this right now. I'll stand here for, 20 seconds and people can click around. Or you can type in some other awesome charity that you like. See if I could hum the, Jeopardy theme or something. I could time a proper amount of, interval. But as I already told you, I wasn't going to sing. You seem like nice people. Nobody deserves that. Okay, go to AE Studio and vote. Now, from the founders on down, we do our good work. We get stuff done. Stuff is not necessarily the word that we use. And we practice effective altruism whenever possible. We even are trying to do things to save lives in terms of quality-adjusted life years. So at one of our hackathons years ago, the winning product was something called Zenaholic. And Zenaholic was basically a tool, and is a tool, which you can download on the App Store right now. And what it will be is a mechanism to do cognitive behavioral therapy, which is the most accepted scientific method for dealing with depression. And it points out cognitive distortions using natural language processing. And then if you think in terms of how much life depression removes from people who suffer from it. So somebody who suffers from depression rates their life as about 30% as good as somebody who does not have depression. So that means every year you spend depressed costs you 0.7 years of your life in some sense. So we're trying to save lives with technology with something like Zenaholic. And we have these hackathons where these ideas emerge often. We just had one in Puerto de Galinas a few weeks ago. We had one in Turks and Caicos a couple years back. There's going to be another one in Brazil shortly. This is an important part of who we are and where our good ideas come from. And this is all possible because we don't have some public shareholders demanding that we do specific things to turn a greater profit. So the story we like to tell around here is that the Google founders promised we're never going to sell ads. Look, if you sold ads, it would absolutely corrupt the sanctity of search. And then investors got involved. Okay, we won't have ads that look like other search results. We'll make sure they're clear and we make sure they're distinct. Okay, well, we need to make a little bit more money. We'll make the ads look just like the search results. Investors sort of corrupt the influence. Facebook and Meta have the same problem now and they can't pivot. So we think our business model gives us and developers as a whole opportunities to do what is right. And finally, we think that we are developing a new equity model that is going to be sort of the norm for development moving forward. So it's not a new idea that developers write better code when they own a piece of the upside. This isn't new. as you can imagine, AE receives some equity from some of the clients it provides service for and some of the skunk works that it incubates. And we already mentioned Electric SMS. We also have Instill, which is a fitness video platform where anybody can create their own fitness app, essentially. And within a few weeks, we had $200,000 of subscriptions and 13,000 users and over 2 million minutes streamed. And all of these companies internally, we give founder level equity to the AE employees who develop these ideas, but we also give little bits of equity to other employees who are not working on these projects. And what that means is that everybody who works for AE is essentially a venture capitalist. And we know that most of these internal ideas are going to fail, and that's perfectly okay, because some of them are going to succeed spectacularly. And we think, no legal promises, obviously, that if we have the kind of people who will want to stick around here and will continue to work on our amazing client projects and continue to build and grow, eventually, and again, no legal promises, we think the folks who work here will become incredibly wealthy and they won't need to work here anymore. And you know what? They still will, because increasing human agency is a way to give your life meaning and to find purpose. And ultimately, buying another fancy car with your exit equity and whatnot does not lead to purpose. But using technology to make humanity better does. So one of the things I'm fond of saying is that software engineers of the 21st century are sort of like the philosophers of ancient Greece, with the only difference being the philosopher of ancient Greece knew exactly that they were thinking about the important questions of human experience. And the software engineers of the 21st century don't always think of themselves in these terms, but we should. So we'll hear a lot in the sort of world of technology about the future of no code and low code, and I don't terribly buy that. I don't think enterprises are going to fail because they can't run regressions or can't generate charts. We fundamentally believe that the future of technology is going to mean good answers derived from good questions, and none of this no code, low code stuff asks good questions for you. So we'll talk a little bit about Agile and why the client needs to be involved in the journey. We don't always tell our clients what they want to hear because wishful thinking gets you into trouble quickly. And we don't really see a future where nobody writes code. We see a future where code becomes something of an extension of our thoughts. But you know what? That still demands having the right kind of thoughts. And we understand where no code and low code might emerge. Certainly, folks who write good code get paid well. Folks who write really good code get paid really well. And organizations are going to try to skimp, but if they do, they're going to get what they pay for. So we do run Agile at AE, and obviously I would think a lot of you are comfortable and familiar with the idea of Agile. And we've always believed that the client has to be involved in the journey from the beginning because plans change. And one of our core values is to over-communicate with our clients. Goals change. We discuss this daily with our clients. And just anybody who thinks they know how a software engineering project is going to end at the beginning is full of bleep. So no code is always sort of an effort to guess before a project begins what will be needed at the end, and that's impossible. And for those of you who grew up in the 90s, you know the quote, "Don't go chasing waterfalls." And for those of you who don't, you can just think of it as a joke about the old waterfall style of software development. So we don't always tell our clients what they want to hear. And one of the reasons we do this is because we understand that when you try to design a software project, if you have 100 tickets and you need every one of them to be completed perfectly for the project to fail, then your project is going to fail. And we write a ton about this and we talk a ton about this because if you walk in the door expecting everything to go right, it's all going to go wrong. And that's going to decrease your agency. It's going to decrease the client's agency. And it's going to make for a rather unpleasant experience. And so we have always been a product-first organization. And there will be more talks about our product-focused design and product-focused development and all of these sort of things. I don't want to steal the thunder from future speakers, but let's just say there are perfect products. There are shipped products. We build stuff, we complete stuff, and we ship stuff. And sometimes that means not everything you want happens exactly as you plan, and that's okay. And by the way, no code, low code doesn't fix that problem either. So the future isn't one where nobody writes code. The future is one where code becomes an extension of your thoughts. So let me tell you a little second story. Back in 2008, and I apologize that I'm telling you that I'm old, back in 2008, I was working in New York in the financial district, right as the world was collapsing in the United States. And I was trying to write neural network software. Now, at the time, writing a neural network basically meant you found a research paper, you looked at some equations, you fought miserably with those equations, you tried to write those equations in R, Then you wrote your back propagation algorithms and your forward pass and your backward pass, and you suffered through it. It was miserable. And of course, the world has improved. Now you can use Keras and TensorFlow and PyTorch and whatever else, and there's better tooling. But you know what? That still requires that you think about the problem you need to solve. This is why, again, I say software engineers are philosophers. Clients often think that building the thing right is the hard part. But the hard part is actually building the right thing. That still demands the right thoughts. And no matter how you abstract away the need to implement certain things in code, you still need to think clearly. We want folks who can ask and answer these kind of questions, who can help our clients ask and answer these kind of questions, and not simply build what they're told to build. And as software engineering grows, we're all going to be required to get beyond just building what's in front of us. So now that we're talking about what the human brain is capable of and the importance, let's talk about brain-computer interfaces. The quote at the bottom is a manipulation of a Da Vinci quote. Leonardo da Vinci famously said that human beings understand more about the stars in the heavens than the soil underfoot. And I might argue that we know more about the stars in the heavens than the brains in our own heads. And this is important because ultimately it leads to the idea of transcription fluency that we think is crucial for human agency, which we'll explain. We think that changing the world means picking neglected problems, which all of us as software engineers should try to do. That this is going to be the third revolution after the agricultural and industrial revolution. And we have to ask ourselves who benefits from this. We have to ask ourselves the dystopian question of what happens if Meta gets there first. And I'll talk a little bit, just briefly, about some of the things that AE is working on with respect to brain-computer interfaces and some challenges in that field. We could talk about this for hours. There will be later talks about BCI. We've written talks about it. We've given podcasts about this. I'm just going to give you a little taste of some of the things that we like playing around with and we think will be important for technology in the future. So I want to introduce an idea called transcription fluency. Transcription fluency is what's happening right now in this room. So I'm standing here speaking, and I'm hoping you understand me. And this is challenging because I have to think about what words I want to say and how I want to say them. And then you have to try to hear those words and interpret them and figure out what the hell I'm trying to communicate to you. And while we're doing this, we're all using these keyboards and these mice. All of these are tools technology has built to interpret our intentions and communicate them into a screen. And we've come a long way. But we've got a long way to go on this front. And by the way, organizations that employ software engineers and frankly everybody else in the world struggle with transcription fluency themselves. They have to be clear about what their mission is and how they communicate that mission to their employees and how they communicate that to their clients. This is really challenging. And so this is why we try to put our money where our mouth is, and we think others will in the future, to try to communicate clearly. Now, let's do a little thought experiment. How much time do you think we all spend every day fighting with our computers and our mices and our Google searches and our Stack Overflows and our email just to sort of communicate an idea into a computer and make what we want to happen happen? I think it's a lot of time. So I'm going to do a math problem with you right now. Let's say there are 600 million people who live in the United States and Brazil combined. 600 million people. Let's say 400 million of those people are of working age, so they're not kids or they're not retired. Let's say we've got 200 million people left over who basically work at a computer. Now, we give, let's say, all of those people, we just give them 30 minutes back in their day from not having to fight with their keyboards and not having to fight with their mice, and they can just think their intention into the computer. Let's assume they all produce $20 US per hour. So they're not even the most productive people on the planet. Now let's assume they work 250 days every year. If you do all that multiplication out, and I have, that turns out to be about $500 billion US. $500 billion US. So that would be more than Amazon and Meta generated in revenue combined. And I only mentioned the people in the US and Brazil. I hear there are people in other countries who use laptops for a living too. So this is kind of a huge problem. And changing the world means picking a neglected problem. Now, I'm not going to argue that curing cancer isn't important or that curing heart disease isn't important. They're incredibly important. But really making a difference means looking at a problem that isn't getting the same amount of attention and resources and really making an impact upon it. So let's talk about a problem. The ultimate loss of agency in our mind is paralysis. And so there's a picture on the right, and it's a picture of a cold beer. Now, I'm sure none of you have ever drank beer, have ever, been drunk or anything like that. I'm sure you're all perfectly behaved human beings, but you may have heard in stories that sometimes people enjoy beer. And there is a man who was paralyzed and lost the ability to use his arm. And by calibrating a brain-computer interface, a robotic arm, driven by his thoughts, was able to lift a robotic arm carrying a beer to his lips, and he sipped that beer at the side of a friend who also had a beer with him. It's a simple experience, but it's powerful. And the future of technology is going to redefine, we hope, and we expect, the difference between what is and isn't able-bodied. There are already cochlear implants in ears today. For those of you who are unfamiliar, a cochlear implant is a piece of technology implanted into the spiral part of the ear, which can allow the ear to communicate sound information to the brain, thereby restoring some of the sensation of hearing to somebody who's lost it. This is, of course, incredible in terms of what it means for the species and what technologists might accomplish, but it also requires us to do some pretty complicated work calibrating models because you don't have the same brain tomorrow that you did today. You definitely don't have the same brain in a week or two. Right now, if you try to calibrate a brain-computer interface, you have to calibrate the model again when you come in a week later. Well, that's no good. So what we're trying to do is recognize patterns of neural activity in the brain so that when a model is calibrated, it is stable and reliable and repeatable. So we believe that this is going to be sort of the third revolution for the human species. So here's what we mean by that. The first revolution was agricultural. There was a time when if you were a human being, your family, everybody had to be out in the fields growing enough food to feed everybody. Everybody. Now, eventually we reached a point technologically when not every human being was needed to grow food. Well, that's a big deal because suddenly now you have huge groups of people who can do something else with their time. They can specialize, they can learn other skills while other people are growing food. And suddenly human knowledge and technological expansion took off exponentially. The next revolution was industrial. Suddenly all of these labor-intensive tasks were made efficient by machines. And there were fights about this. For those of you who are unfamiliar, the Luddites were a group of people who would fight to destroy factories and burn down the automated looms because they thought those looms were stealing jobs. The Luddites always lose, I'm just saying. But what grew out of this? This led to knowledge work. So all of the people who didn't need to use their labor in a factory could then work technologically in a different way. Every one of us who works with a laptop as our machinery, we are beneficiaries of this. Knowledge work came out of this. So the next revolution is going to be BCI, where suddenly your keyboard and your mouse are unnecessary and you're vastly more productive because of the way you can connect to your machines and other people. But what's going to happen here? Are you going to be more productive? Sure. Who gets the benefit of that? Are you going to get paid more because you're more productive? Are you going to work less to do the same amount of work? Well, that's not what happened so far. I have email and all sorts of technology. I don't work less. I just am expected to do more. Are the companies that employ us going to gain more profits? What's going to be the new model? And these are questions that software engineers and those building technology have to grapple with. Like I said, the ancient Greek philosophers are now software engineers. So this is at least a little bit scary. There's an image on the right side of this screen with addictive drug paraphernalia. So what happens if Meta gets there first? Put a little quote. When the pics appear on the smartphone screen with their well-timed hits of dopamine, it's a new lifetime guarantee. So when you look at your Meta feed, they're already trying to show you images of things you want to buy. They're already trying to show you images of people you're going to find attractive. And what they're trying to do is stimulate the pleasure center of your brain. Now, imagine if that tool was already inside your brain. That should be terrifying. If that idea gets under your skin, you should think to yourself, well, that's the goal. Can you imagine if the next time you were thirsty, an ad popped up for Coke because we could see the neural patterns that said you're thirsty? Can you imagine that after you've had a couple of beers, maybe the ad pops up and says, are you sure? You know, you've already had 2 beers. Do you really need to have a third? I mean, it's sort of a dystopian novel that I'm articulating, but that's not impossible. So since this technology is coming, we should all want developers who are focused on human agency to be the ones who ultimately develop it. And so to that end, AE at least is involved in what's called the Neural Latency Benchmark Challenge. It's a simple math problem, and it goes something like this. If I tell you the rates at which a bunch of neurons in the brain are firing, write a model and figure out the rates at which a bunch of other neurons are firing. Sounds like a straightforward type of problem. Oh, except that there are 80 billion neurons in the brain, and we can measure maybe, I don't know, 100 or so of them at a time. So this is how we try to expand human knowledge. Remember I told you that story a few minutes ago about how I used to dig holes in the ground and install soil moisture sensors as a government scientist? So we would fly to different parts of the world and we'd put sensors in the ground and we'd put them in different types of textures and topographies and whatever else. But no matter how many sensors we had, you never could afford enough sensors or maintain enough sensors to model the complexity of the world's landscape. And so what you would do is you would put a sensor 5 centimeters into the ground and you'd write a model and say, can I guess what's going on at 10 centimeters and 20 centimeters? Or you stick a sensor in the ground here and then you try to write a model that estimates in concentric circles outward from that sensor, or maybe this sensor and another sensor similar 100 miles away, but we could still use this to make an inference. And that's how we sort of expand scientific knowledge. Well, the same challenge is being played out in the human brain. And the Neural Latence Benchmark Challenge is one in which the best scientists in the world put forward their models, the best research models that academia and university have put forward, and then their data sets. And they said, okay, can anybody do a better job of predicting neural activity and the latent patterns in the human brain than this? That competition is ongoing. It will end January 7th. And the only company that has been able to build a model better than the best scientists and universities has been AE. We are excited about this, and we think this is an important way to drive technology and agency forward. And I put a little quote at the bottom from the Karate Kid. Come on, admit it, we kicked some butt. And Mr. Miyagi reminds everyone, fighting is not good, but if you must fight, win. So we're pretty excited about what these patterns will mean and what this means for us as technologists. So is this the end? No, it's a what's next question. You have to ask yourself as a developer what motivates you. What little baby step can you take yourself to increase human agency for yourself, for your clients, for other human beings? Because we think those baby steps are going to accelerate forward exponentially. Just think about this as a thought experiment. In 1903, there was a 12-second flight along the beach in North Carolina in the United States. It was the first human flight. 12 seconds on the beach. 66 years later, human beings landed on the moon. And that pace of technological growth is going faster and faster. Could a human being in 1900 have ever imagined what the world would look like in 1950? Of course not. Could a human being in 1950 have imagined that we were going to land on the moon? Could they have imagined that by 2000 there would be computers in houses and, internet access? Of course not. We were alive in 2000. Could you have imagined everybody would have a smartphone and Wi-Fi would be everywhere? Of course not. You can't imagine this. But you can think about increasing the agency of human beings. And as software engineers, as technologists, as leaders, we have a moral obligation to consider not just the work we're doing, but who we're doing that work for, and the values that are held by the people who are doing those challenges and doing that work. It's not enough to do good work. It's important to do work for people who have the value of increasing human agency, because this is going to be the most important century on that front. It's incredibly exciting, and I think we all get to be a part of it. Thank you so very much.